Welcome, welcome. Heroes of the Horde and Adventures of the Alliance. My name is Weirdo, and today we're discussing the Call to Adventure. Did you guys know that when classic servers were initially announced, I firmly believed that they were going to fail? Obviously, I was incorrect. I thought that rose-colored glasses were blinding people to the many quality of life upgrades we'd gotten over the years. But more than that, I swore that even if everything down to the last pixelated atom was recreated exactly the same as we remembered it, it still wouldn't be the same, because we are not the same. We knew all the paths, and had discovered all the secrets. Classic was solved. We had seen the four corners of the map, and we had devoured every mystery, leaving it bare. I admit to being wrong in so many different ways when it came to classic servers, but on this last point I hold firm. We can never go back to how WoW made us feel in those early years. But I can't blame anyone for trying, because I wish we could too. At the time I had forgotten that a decade and a half of game design had shifted WoW, not only from its mechanical foundations, but from its design philosophy. As I mentioned in a prior video, WoW launched with roughly 40 zones back in the day.
46 if you count capital cities.
And a majority of those all contain separate, distinct quest experiences for both Horde and Alliance players. See, classic WoW and the Burning Crusade after it follow a philosophy of game design that we gamer snobs call sandboxian in its methodology. Not much rhyme or reason for why anyone goes anywhere, meant to wander the roads less traveled. The level ranges aren't consecutive across the map, and for that reason, backtracking and rubber banding across the continents is encouraged. Every zone had a different story. Some were more compelling than others, but each time you set foot onto a new map, you'd always feel the promise of a new adventure. It's why Classic was so, well, classic. We had the grind, but it wasn't the same, because as of now, we didn't really have a goal. Not yet. We had no idea what we were doing, and neither did Blizzard. We just knew we were having a blast. And if you think about it, us trying to harness that boundless energy and potential of this early phase and wrangle it into a single narrative, it almost feels like a betrayal of that legacy. So we won't. At least not in the way you might think. Today we're tackling the story of vanilla at launch. And if we wanted to truly represent that story in a purely narrative medium, it could only be done properly as an anthology. Rather, a series of unrelated or loosely connected tales that share common themes but no common plot. Again, not yet. My favorite example of this idea might be Hiromu Arakawa's masterpiece, Fullmetal Alchemist. I know I'm stretching the definition of anthology here, but in the beginning of this story, the Elric brothers' adventures really do seem disconnected. They had a goal, but no way to get there. Eventually the series settles into its main track, and as it progresses, you're able to look back and see all the seeds that had been planted by those early, allegedly inconsequential adventures. A perhaps better, more commercial example of this would be the early Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before Joss Whedon's first big team-up, the early movies really only had two things in common: soft science energy crises and Samuel L. Jackson. They were created as separate elements, and only when combined did they reveal their explosive chemistry. For our purposes, as our six adventuring heroes journey across the world pursuing their own interests, they will each find traces of a hidden conspiracy, one that eventually ties back to a central group of antagonists. They're not going to know what they're finding at first. Each clue will be suspicious yet unremarkable on its own. Alone they will mean nothing, but as the adventure continues, the more they find, the more the puzzle pieces come together to form a picture. We chose this method so as not to alter the course of WoW's base zone stories, but rather to gently nudge towards our own purpose. Very gently. If you take the time to look, it's astonishing how much of this early content tied into modern storylines. Not every quest leads into the immediate future. Some of them are laying up stories that won't be dunked for 10 to 15 years. Nevertheless, this ball of threads is so interwoven that if we were to go pulling on loose strands here and there, there's no telling what might unravel. So instead, think of us as lifting the fabric and hiding little Easter eggs underneath. Now, I know what you're thinking. Are we actually going to drag you through all 40 zones in this video, hunting for tiny Easter eggs and hidden story hooks? Well, it's actually 42 zones now, and yes, we are.
No, we're not doing that. Focus.
What do you mean focus? How are we going to get everyone to see the big picture if we don't drill down into the nitty-gritty of each individual zone?
Stop. Put your finger in front of your nose. It's hard to see, right? Now move it away from your face, and suddenly it all becomes clear.
Okay. Now I see my finger. And... oh, dungeons. Good call. Full disclosure, I spent an unhealthy amount of time in flashcards trying to map out which hero went to which zone, who would be credited for famous quest lines like Hagar or Mancrick's wife, and while I'm really pleased with what I made, in the end it just became too convoluted and way too dense for our purposes. Especially Kalimdor. See, early on, the WoW dev team had to keep fixing parts of the Eastern Kingdom, and that ate into the development time for Kalimdor, so I looked at old concepts like Gilligam's Island and...
That's enough.
Right, focusing. Perhaps one day, if there's enough interest, we can go back and cover individual zone rewrites. But for now, in the hope of finishing vanilla sometime before the sun dies, it makes more sense to focus the spotlight of our rewrite onto the dungeons. In the long term, dungeons and instances are sort of the narrative crescendo in WoW. This isn't exactly the case yet in vanilla. They were more group challenges, fun to tackle with friends, but not really leading up to anything. And the zones weren't built around them as they would be in modern X-Packs. Nevertheless, each one does present an interesting narrative opportunity and a focal point to weave said narrative around. Not to mention that since the zones aren't built around them, the story often requires someone to send the heroes into their depths, which creates conveniently natural points in our story to introduce keystone or otherwise just relevant characters to the party and the narrative. In this way, focusing on the dungeon solves a number of headaches, while at the same time creating fun new ones. For one, Classic had an imbalance in the factions when it came to zones and dungeons. Horde had more dungeons, Alliance has more zones. Now honestly, this isn't really the case mechanically, since the game let anyone, regardless of faction, tackle any dungeon. And as we mentioned, contested zones often had parallel or even perpendicular stories for the two factions at the same time. This was another reason why my original map plan wasn't working. But dungeons in canon can only be completed once, which means we had to choose which faction got to tackle which dungeon, and this left the scales tilted. To solve this issue, we dug deep into the vault and the cutting room floor to find ideas that were too complicated to implement or that the team just didn't have time to complete. For the record, I don't intend to do this with every expansion. Faction representation does not always need to be equitable. There will be times that the story will favor the Horde over the Alliance and vice versa, and that is okay. But for this time, the first time, it felt important for the two factions to rhyme. And hopefully you'll see why as we go on. The next issue with our PvE dungeon-centric narrative is that it ignores the value added to WoW's story and culture from the PvP perspective.
Hey, Twins pay subscriptions too.
This is a problem that we tackle more firmly in the next video, but I'm teeing it up here to help reinforce a point that will guide us through this entire series. All stories have a lesson, and a good story teaches you its lesson without you realizing that you're learning it. For World of Warcraft, its greatest lessons are the ones hidden within the relationship between the Horde and the Alliance. We will be discussing this more later, but when I talk about making sure that WoW always feels like Warcraft, this is what I mean. Anyway, the final most immediate issue, which we've been cheekily alluding to but never addressing, is Vanilla's lack of a central antagonist. This is actually a persistent problem in WoW until Wrath, and it's not one we can fix with a hammer. Not every dungeon can be tied into our global conspiracy. That would rob the world of its sense of scope. Some dungeons will simply be putting in front-end work to foreshadow later chapters, but in the majority of cases, the dungeons will contain hints and traces, all leading back to one centralized group of antagonists.
Okay, but who?
Elementary, my dear Hargan. None other than the Black Dragonflight.
Weirdo, are you telling me that the two main focal points of your vanilla rewrite are dungeons and dragons?
No. Incidentally, for no reason, go ahead and roll an insight check for me. These days, the Black Dragons are remembered mostly for Deathwing, but he doesn't really deliver on the promise of the Black Dragonflight's narrative potential. Ancient, duplicitous scale monsters capable of infiltrating societies in mortal guise and who seek the complete subjugation of Azeroth's lesser races. The Black Dragonflight in early days were meant to embody cunning. They were demagogues and mad scientists. Yes, they were ruthless and cruel, but at their core they were schemers, manipulators. This is what made Deathwing such a potent threat. On top of his great power was his terrible ambition, and his unmatched subtlety and manipulation. Then, by the time he arrives on stage in Cataclysm, he's about as subtle as a tactical nuclear strike. His promise is inherited by Wrathion, who does a fine job with it, but in the role of a begrudging ally or even an anti-hero. The Black Dragons deserve their moment to shine as the cunning antagonists they were meant to be, and for our story, that moment is now. However, there's one small narrative change I'd like to make to them first. Deathwing's original title when he was still Neltharion was Earth Warder. He was meant to be the protector of the Earth itself, and the deep places of the world. But when you place this duty alongside the charges of the other flights, life, magic, the Emerald Dream, and time itself, rocks, kind of feels underwhelming. Almost like it was always meant to be replaced.
Well, it's no wonder Neltharion went rogue.
The dictionary definition of a warder is the guard of a prison. What if Deathwing's charge was not to guard the Earth for the Earth's sake, but because the Earth contained the prisons of the elemental lords, and, unbeknownst to the other flights, the old gods? The original charge of the Black Dragonflight will no longer be to guard the Earth, but rather to guard the planar barriers that exist that separate Azeroth from outside invasion and influence, such as the elementals, the demons, or the void. I momentarily even considered changing Deathwing's title to Realm Warder before I realized how stupid that sounded. This is a change of flavor and not substance. The Black Dragons still fell to corruption, but they did so as a result of the nature of their charge, rather than by simple adjacency to caves. This is also a call that Wrathion will one day take up alone, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Today, the schemes of the fallen Black Dragonflight suffuse the stories of vanilla. The trick here is subtlety. The revelation of the existence of our conspiracy should be a reward for those paying attention, and not the main flavor of the plot. Each of the 6 heroes will have 3 dungeons to tackle independently, before their paths start to interweave. Within each of the 3, every individual dungeon should present a unique story, but with a common thread relevant to a single goal. The book The WoW Diary, written by John Statz, actually details a plan very similar to this one that the team came up with during WoW's early storyboarding phase. Each of the 6 playable races,
Gnomes and Trolls, were a last-minute addition.
Had a unique campaign path that occasionally intersected with the others along common dungeons. Chronologically, I feel that the dungeon tales would take place after each character has established themselves as an adventurer through the zone quests, but everyone is free to interpret it however makes the most sense to them. Starting with the humans, in the southern west coast of the Eastern Kingdoms north of Stranglethorn Vale,
Don't do that again.
sorry, we find the Kingdom of Stormwind, the last bastion of humanity struggling to rebuild after the devastation of 3 separate wars. The human path explores the corruption in the House of Nobles, which we all know ties back to a single source. The story of Jorn the Redeemer, son of Gavinrath the Dire, begins as he takes his oaths to follow the light and to dispense justice as a knight-errant of the Brotherhood of the Horse, before setting out to make a name for himself through quests including, but not limited to, the Fargo Deep Mines and the defeat of the infamous Knoll bandit, Hogger. Eventually, he's contacted by the mysterious Matthias Shaw, head of Stormwind Intelligence, who requests Jorn lead a party of heroes
That's you guys.
into the Dead Mines to put an end to the threat of the Defias Brotherhood. In the end, Jorn personally slays Edwin Van Cleef when he refuses to lay down his blades, and after the battle discovers a number of papers within the Kingpin's personal quarters that actually prove the Stonemasons Guild had never been paid for their work rebuilding the city of Stormwind, thus legitimizing the Stonemasons' grievances against the kingdom. Jorn reports this to Shaw, who in turn brings it before the throne. As the royal council deliberates, Jorn receives a message from the Archbishop Jarl Benedictus, leader of the Church of the Holy Light, who has been beseeching the council to investigate the troubling reports coming from Manor Mistmantle. This is our first new dungeon, based off a 2011 April Fool's joke, circa Cataclysm. The original satire was called The Tomb of Immortal Darkness, and had a final boss named Lord OMG Sogoth.
In the darkness, no one can see you scream.
In our story, within Manor Mistmantle, Jorn discovers firsthand the corruption of one of the noble houses. Stalvan Mistmantle, a real NPC in the game whose story is based off the novel Lolita, which we will discuss no further and rapidly move on from, leads a society called the Veiled Hand, who obsess over power and who practice demonic fel and necromantic magics in secret. I like the idea that the Tomb of Immortal Darkness actually exists within the manor, but was so named by the foppish nobles hoping to sound intimidating. The demon they accidentally managed to summon can even be named Omzagoth, but it will start to slaughter everyone in the manor the second it arrives until Jorn puts it down. Our knight returns to Stormwind Keep to add the account of the manor to the evidence being considered against the House of Nobles, but upon his arrival he's accosted by the Lady Katrina Prestor, court enchantress and one of the king's closest advisors. Troubled by the events of Manor Mistmantle, she sends Jorn on a quest into Deadwind Pass to retrieve a powerful artifact from the catacombs beneath the Tower of the Guardian, the Karazhan Crypts. As the legend goes, this dungeon was originally meant to be included in vanilla, but the concepts were so disturbing that it would have raised the game's rating from T to M.
No!
In reality, it was likely cut for dev time, but we're excited to bring it back, along with its denizens, the Dark Riders of Karazhan, and their leader, Aradin, once a group of merchants cursed by Medivh to roam the lands collecting rare objects of great power in order to hoard them within the walls of Karazhan. With Medivh gone, their mission continues, but without direction, and Jorn is forced into a desperate battle with the riders underneath the cursed tower, and only manages to escape with the mysterious blue and red orb by sheer luck. Upon his return, he delivers the item to the enchantress, who appears surprised to see him, but before she can explain more about her plans, an alarm rings out across the city of Stormwind. Meanwhile... Oh, by the way, we're trying to tell 6 concurrent stories here, so prepare yourself to hear me say this a lot. Yeah. Meanwhile... Dexter Dazzlespring, gnome mage extraordinaire, takes a moment to recover from the shell shock following the fall of Gnomergon. Unfortunately, there's neither rest for the wicked or for extraordinary gnomes, and so Dexter is soon called upon by High Tinker Gelbin Mechatork to lead a team back into the irradiated halls of the wondrous mechanical city in search of any trapped survivors. The gnome storyline will explore the unrest of those creatures that dwell within the deep places of the world.
Foreshadowing.
Dexter leads the charge back into Gnomergon, rescuing all he can find. He does battle with the monstrous Trogs, the city's mechanical defenders, and worst of all, the infected leper gnomes, even facing off against the mad traitor Mechaneer Thermoplug in the halls of the Tinker Court, before being forced to flee the city once again. Though lauded for his efforts, Dexter, never one to leave a problem unsolved, seeks to better understand the Trogs, who had originally invaded the city and forced the gnomes to consider their nuclear solution. These questions drive him to investigate the Titan ruins of Uldamon, where the Trogs were said to originate. Once there, a chance encounter with the leader of the Explorers League, Bran Bronzebeard, and a clumsy ambush by a group of Dark Iron dwarves violently awakens the sleeping Titanic Watchers within the ruins. ruins, including the towering Arcadius, who calls himself Keeper. Interrogating the surviving Dark Irons leads Dexter forward into the cursed halls of Grim Batol, the ancestral home of the Wildhammer dwarves. Grim Batol was originally a dungeon,
more likely a raid,
planned for vanilla that never managed to find the proper timing. Though it's introduced in Cataclysm eventually, it's not really done justice, and it's overshadowed by the Bastion of Twilight raid, which I don't find satisfying in the least. The perverse rituals performed by the Dark Irons during the War of the Three Hammers conjured horrors that not only drove the Wildhammers from Grim Batol, it disturbed them so deeply that they would never feel comfortable underground again. Not to mention, during the Second War, the haunted ruins were used by the Dragonmaw clan as a prison for the Dragon Queen Alexstrasza.
That's a mild way to put that.
Dexter ventures inside with the aid of Falstad Dragonreaver, current leader of the Wildhammer dwarves, and observes a meeting between the Dark Irons and the Dragonmaw orcs. The Dark Irons demand the orcs' secret to binding dragons, which the Dragonmaw subsequently refused to provide. Dexter hears for the first time mention of a true horde, before they're all set upon by the Scaradin, cursed ancestors of those unable to escape the shadow during the War of the Three Hammers. The battle ultimately spills into the prison of the Lifebinder, where Dexter is forced into combat with the Hand of Necros, the flaming guardian of the demon soul left behind after the death of its master, and the destruction of the disc. Nobody ever confirms this, but I swear I always thought this thing was an infernal. Anyway, the Dark Irons inevitably escape with the Demon Chain, the chain on which the demon soul was originally hung, forcing Dexter to give chase into the south. Unable to follow through the Dark Iron Highway, he travels to Ironforge and hops onto the Deep Run tram, arriving in Stormwind just in time to hear that same alarm being raised through the city. Within the Stormwind stockades, a violent revolt has broken out, and the guards have completely lost control of the situation. Bolvar Fordragon, Regent Lord of Stormwind City, is now calling upon every able body willing to help put a stop to it before it spills into the streets. It's here that Jorn and Dexter meet for the first time. The Paladin and the Mage make for a deadly combination in battle, as well as fast friends. The two share a drink once the fighting is concluded, and together they found the Knights of the Lost Ashes, a guild of heroes to honor the last stand of his father Gavinrad, as well as Uther, and the lost cities of Dalaran and Nomergon.
The Ash Knights, for short.
The following morning, the two are again contacted by Matthias Shaw. At this juncture, the Spy Master, alongside Bolvar Fordragon, reveals that Stormwind's king, Varian Rin, is missing and has been for months now. Shaw had grown suspicious of the House of Nobles, and only more so given Jorn's reports. Amongst the ringleaders of the Stockade Uprising were members of the Defias Brotherhood, the Blackrock Orcs, and the Dark Iron Dwarves, but curiously, also several members of an organization called the Syndicate, a group of rogues and criminals who hold ties to the fallen kingdom of Ultrak. The presence of this last group alone remains unexplained, and so Shaw sends the pair north, into the Arathi Highlands to investigate.
Alright, that's enough about the Alliance. I'd like to hear more about the Horde!
Okay. Ahem. Meanwhile, Magus Kolai, last of the Thunderlord, buries her mentor Fenris Wolfbrother, and sets out to forge her own legend, killing an endless number of toothless coyotes and hoofless zebras, and even helping poor old Mancrick find his wife. The Orc story explores finding a balance between their past and their future, struggling against the legacy of the old horde, but also trying to carve out a place for themselves in the new world. Early on, Magus encounters Vol'jin, leader of the Darkspear Trolls, who seeks warriors to help reclaim the Echo Isles from the mad witch doctor Zalazane. This is a new Loa and Voodoo themed dungeon made to parallel Nomergon. Magus eventually returns with the head of the witch doctor, but the curse upon the Isles remains. Vol'jin speculates that there must be something else keeping the dark magic flowing, but is interrupted by the arrival of one of the war chief's wolf riders. The horde is mustering in the barrens and is calling upon all of its warriors to join in the effort. Magus answers the war chief's call and finds her people embroiled in a new conflict. While the orcs may have reclaimed their honor under thrall and their willpower thanks to Grom, they are still a race of warriors, and they grow restless without a proper challenge. Thankfully, the Quillbore, after years of unprovoked aggression, now provide it. Led by Eitrig, the grizzled old advisor of the young war chief, Magus joins her people in combating the pigmen's strange magic. For our purposes here, we're combining Razorfen Crawl and Razorfen Downs for the sake of thematic consistency. Eitrig sends her, along with several brave adventurers, deep into the heart of Razorfen in order to deal with the Quillbore's leader, Chalga Razorflank, the Crone. While inside, they discover a dark bargain made between the Quillbore and the Scourge. The Lich, Amanar the Coldbringer, raises the dead within the Quillbore's ancient burial grounds, perverting the natural order of life and death. In the end, Magus emerges from the brambles, bloodied, but with a head in each hand, the head of the Crone and the skull of the Coldbringer. Originally, I had planned to totally remove the Scourge from this dungeon and replace them with something else, given how random their presence seems to be. But after further consideration, this might be the Scourge's only tie to the orcish side of the Horde before Wrath of the Lich King, so I'm gonna leave it as it is. However, the union between the Scourge and the Quillbore is still one that comes so far out of left field it may as well have been thrown by the hot dog vendor, so the clue we'll be placing amongst the brambles is that the union was facilitated by a third, unknown party, of a group calling themselves the Cabal. Following the conclusion of the Razorfen War, the climax of the orc story takes place in Demonfall Canyon, a dungeon that I did not make up, but rather stole from Classic's Season of Discovery, and which I only learned about recently while doing research for the script. It's based in the location where Thrall and Grom slew Menoroth, ending the demonic bloodlust of the orcs and freeing their race from corruption. Reading early notes from the WoW diary, it looks like one of the common lines of thought when it came to dungeon design was to use significant locations from Warcraft 3 in order to create different encounters for the players in WoW. However, the only time they really succeeded at this appears to be Strathholm, so it's something that we've kept in mind during our remapping. Anyway, when Magus arrives, she's met by Semiro, Blade Master of the Burning Blade, and sole member of his clan to have joined with Thrall's new horde. Semiro explains that the remnants of his former clan have continued to worship the demons and are now gathering at Menoroth's corpse, hoping to gain power from the pools of blood left behind by the slain demon. A quick aside, in traditional WoW, the Burning Blade have gone the route of clan to cult, but they never managed to pull it off quite as well as the Twilight Hammer do. The origins of their clan lie in the unique concept of Orc Blade Masters, which has been completely lost both in-game and in modern lore. They're essentially Orc Samurai, and that sentence alone is metal enough to cause me to want to change them from being the Diet Twilight Hammer into something more impactful. So we're dropping the cult flavor. The Burning Blade will remain a clan of warriors and will be moved from Ragefire Chasm to Demonfall Canyon. We'll return to Ragefire soon, but I've diverged too far. Right now, back to Magus. She and Semiro storm the canyon, confronting the demons in the Burning Blade head on. Together, the two put a stop to the Blade Master's former clan, and yet even as they fall, cries of "For the True Horde" ring in Magus's ears. At last, before the bones of Menoroth himself, their final opponent, the Destructor's Wrath, emerges from the pools of blood, only to be put down again for the glory of the Horde. The voodoo of Zalazane, the necromancy of the Scourge, and now the demonic magics of the Burning Blade. Dark powers are stirring on the continent of Kalimdor, and all at the same time. Magus decides that this riddle is meant for those wiser than herself, and so she heads to Orgrimmar to consult with the war chief Thrall. Meanwhile, Kel Stonebull, Longwalker sworn to Cairn Bloodhoof, battles centaurs to rescue Cairn's son Bane, for the second time, before he too makes his way to where all warriors of the Horde must one day go, the Barrens. Here he encounters his old mentor, Hamul Runetotem, first of the Tauren Druids, who seeks to undo the corruption wrought by the Druids of the Fang within the Wailing Caverns. Though he turned from the path of a druid, as a hunter, Kel still holds great reverence for the balance of nature, and so leads a band into the caverns to help put an end to Gnarlax's madness. More than any other, Kel finds himself gripped by a wanderlust.
And this was Weirdo's way of saying that Stonebull's dungeons were the least interconnected of the lot.
Hey, the Tauren are supposed to be nomads. It fits. In Desolus, Kel meets Muln Earthfury, leader of the Earthen Ring. He reveals that someone has been rallying the centaurs to war, and in turn, the centaurs have been disrupting the elementals. The Earthen Ring has decided to put an end to their fervor before it can gain momentum. A war party is sent within the centaurs' holiest sites, Moradon, where Kel battles the maddened elemental princess Theradras, the daughter of Therazane and the mother to the centaur race. Her presence only further shows the growing imbalance amongst Azeroth's elementals. But with the centaurs subdued for a time, Kel continues on his travels. In the far south, he encounters Magath Grimtotem, second advisor to Cairn alongside Hamul Runetotem.
A lot of Tauren names seem to end in totem.
Yeah, the suffix totem in the Tauren language appears to be similar to the suffix son or man in our language. Rune Totem, Grim Totem, Wind Totem, and Blood Totem, just to name a few. The taciturn crone reveals that she's been in contact with members of the Cabal, a criminal organization that deals in deranged alchemical concoctions, and who have been supplying said concoctions to the Faraki Sand Fury Trolls, just as they'd been supplying them to the Centaurs and the Quillbore. The crone helps Kel and his allies raid the city of Zul'Farrak, and they put a stop to a gruesome ritual, saving the lives of several mercenaries before they could be sacrificed to the Faraki Loa of Death, Muizala.
Fun fact, this was World of Warcraft's first scripted event.
In the final battle against Chieftain Sandscalp, Kel finds strange trolls amongst the natives, each laughing in the face of death and crying, "Glory to Kazakis." Kel decides the Horde must be informed of the Cabal's dark dealings, and so he too makes for Orgrimmar.
Are you guys starting to get the rhythm yet?
Both he and Magus arrive in Grommash Hold, where the war chief is holding council. Listening to their reports, he too finds the timing of events to be no coincidence, and even adds his own report to the pile. Of late, many citizens of Orgrimmar have been disappearing, and Thrall's agents in the Shattered Hand have traced the disappearances to the volcanic caverns beneath the city. But thus far, none of his agents have returned from within. Magus and Kel both volunteer to investigate, and together delve deep into Ragefire Chasm. Once inside, they find a disturbing scene. You guys remember several paragraphs back when we moved the Burning Blade from this dungeon to preserve their Blade Master aesthetic? Well, we needed to put someone else in their place, and lucky for us, the Bone Chewer clan had no conflicts on their schedule, and neither did their new masters, the Shadow Council. The Bone Chewers, like the Thunderlords, are another lost clan, except instead of being known for reckless acts of suicidal bravery, they were known for cannibalism. In the lore, both clans disappear at the exact same time. And there's even a moment in the novel Beyond the Dark Portal where it seems like both might be ordered to stay behind on Azeroth to defend the portal, then they just aren't and they're never seen again. So, much like Fenris, we've decided that the Bone Chewers stormed the portal during the destruction of Draenor. Then, over the years, the simple-minded brutes fell under the sway of the remnants of the Shadow Council. Now, within the volcanic bowels of Ragefire Chasm, the Bone Chewers feast, while their masters work their dark magics on the souls of their victims. Magus and Kel slaughter the denizens of the chasm, putting an end to the savage rituals. Among the dead, they also find the bodies of several black-toothed Green Orcs, none of whom ever joined with the new horde, and all of them carrying a number of potions bearing the symbol of the Cabal. Even in the darkness of the battle below Orgrimmar, Magus and Kel form a bond closer than blood. Magus decides that if the Stone Bull is unworthy to call himself a Thunderlord, no one else ever could be, and so she decides to open the ranks of her clan to all who would hunt at her side, and Kel is proud to join with her, transforming the Thunderlord clan into the Thunderlord Militia. It turns out I did feel like changing the name after all.
Thunderslayers, for short.
Thrall blesses the new guild personally before informing them of his growing concerns. While he intends to investigate the Shadow Council and the Black-Toothed Grin Orcs himself, the mysterious Cabal spreading unrest across the continent cannot be ignored. He sends the pair south to investigate the Cabal on their own turf, the mean streets of Gadgetzan. These first 4 storylines all lead into our most significant change in vanilla thus far, the addition of 2 hidden, legendary quest lines that represent a reward to any who have put the effort into collecting the puzzle pieces we've hidden beneath each dungeon. The Thunderslayers will be sent to Gadgetzan alongside Rokhan, the Darkspear Shadowhunter, and Thrall's top scout, while the Alliance will head towards Stromgarde, accompanied by the mage Ronan, special agent to the Kirin Tor. Though the wizards are still recovering from Dalaran's destruction at this point, they are still members of the Alliance. In both of these stories, we get to dive into a lesser explored area of vanilla, battle a secret criminal organization, and fixate on a mysterious, central figure. Each questline also needs to lean heavily into the machinations of the Black Dragonflight, however, I felt it was too soon to blow the horn on Onyxia and Nefarian, which means we needed 2 new Black Dragons to fill these roles. Luckily, we had some on hand. The first, Nallis, is a black dragon we see for the first time during a meeting of the Wormrest Accord in Wrath of the Lich King. She is uniquely the only character that we'd never seen before atop the Temple and Dragonblight, so I felt that she could be further explored here. She plants herself within the Syndicate, manipulating Aladin Paranold and the Crush Ridge Ogres in a bid to wipe out the last remnants of Stromgarde and seize control of Alterac, as Deathwing himself once attempted to do. WoW's story never really dives into Stromgarde despite its lore significance, and I think this could be a good opportunity to do so. The Syndicate too, despite being a potentially fascinating exploration of the only human kingdom to ever be truly eradicated as an entity, are entirely forgotten after the launch of WoW. Amidst all of this will be Nallis, playing both sides. I envision her as a femme fatale type character, using her charm to find herself in the beds of both Aladin Paranold and Galen Trollbane, maybe even influencing the Ravenholt to a degree. Meanwhile, on the Horde side, any Hearthstone players among you will have already realized I'm drawing on the character of Kazakis, a troll alchemist who runs the Cabal, one of the street gangs that reside in the stylized Broadway version of Gadgetzan created for the expansion set Mean Streets of Gadgetzan. Kazakis is eventually revealed to be a black dragon himself, and in a later expansion he even gets to sing a duet with Onyxia.
Wow, that's Hearthstone coded.
We won't be going that far, but I felt the character itself was potent enough to survive in the major leagues, and so here he is. This is also a good place to start forging the Horde's relationship with the Goblins, who at this point in the story are wholly neutral, but even now lean pretty heavily red. The Thunderslayers can throw themselves into the gang warfare of Gadgetzan, helping Marin Noggenfogger take control of the city's illicit potion market, while ousting the Cabal and putting an end to Kazakis' warped drug trade. Simultaneously, the schemes of both new characters serve to point towards the Black Dragonflight, but I don't think I'd reveal that either of them are dragons just yet, merely hint. Each quest also builds towards a climactic boss fight, but one that will take the focus away from the secret dragons. The Alliance will battle the Syndicate in the ruins of Stromgarde. As Nallis pulls the strings of both princes, she finally forces a confrontation with Aladin Paranold, son of the late Aidan Paranold, and, a little known fact that most people are unaware of, former squire to Aedelus Blackmore, the heartless tyrant who raised Thrall as a slave. Meanwhile, the Horde, after finally cornering Kazakis with the aid of Gadgetzan's other gangs, fall into his trap and are forced to fight Tagar Spinebreaker, the original leader of the Bone Chewer clan, now warped and driven mad by Kazakis' alchemical mixtures inked into his very skin. In WoW's original timeline, he can be found as a named NPC wandering Hellfire Peninsula in the Burning Crusade. He's killable, but he drops no loot and there is no quest to bring him down. This new ending might feel a bit random, but I'd argue it's still better than that. These questlines finish with the immediate threat neutralized and the Puppet Master monsters both unaccounted for. However, at this point, some of you may be wondering about a pretty glaring absence in our plot.
Where the hell are the Night Elves and the Forsaken?
An excellent question, Hargan. This is because, as I alluded to in a previous video, the pair represent narrative foils both their allies and their enemies. This doesn't mean their stories are less important, they just haven't been immediately relevant to this story. But they're about to be. The previous 4 paths have all been woven around the Black Dragon fight, but this won't be the case for the Nelfs and the zombies. Were we to try to shoehorn the Black Dragon fight into these particular stories, it would insert a level of unnatural contrivance that would be hard to ignore in the retelling. But them being disconnected isn't really a bad thing. Rather, these dungeons are setting the groundwork up for the next decade of WoW's storytelling. They each build to their own climax, but one that's pretty separate from the Horde and the Alliance, at least primarily. And for this reason, the Night Elves and the Forsaken's path actually take place before they canonically join with the Alliance and the Horde. Though disconnected, the two stories share a fairly common central theme of fighting back against corruption. The Night Elves do so through the use of ritualistic cleansing, while the Undead do so through the use of murder. The Forsaken side is pretty straightforward. The Forsaken are here. They're fighting the Scourge. The Scourge is evil, and we hate them. That touches on pretty much everything they do, even in the cases when they aren't fighting the Scourge. Their conflicts all revolve around horror, monsters, and undeath. Baron Perinold, our undead rogue, only recently in control of his mind again, seeks to enact vengeance upon the remaining Scourge in Lordaeron, and against the living that seek to persecute and damn his existence. At the behest of Varamathras, the Banshee Queen's personal dreadlord, the Baron raids Shadowfang Keep and wets his blade with the blood of the Archmage Arugal. The dreadlord was intrigued by the dark magics employed to create the Worgen Curse, but is ultimately unable to crack them for his own use. Unmoved by the demon's frustrations, the Baron leaves him to his brooding. He next encounters Grand Apothecary Putris. The head of the Royal Apothecary Society has taken a great interest in the spiders of Venomweb Vale. This is a new dungeon based around the former meeting place of the Council of Tirisfal. The giant spiders themselves are canonically a creation of one of the council mages. I envision all sorts of magical hazards all leading up to a great stone council table covered in webs. The Baron battles the spiders and other strange magics and in the end slays Sriskulk, the largest of the spiders, and provides the apothecary with several samples of her venom. Putris then, in his gratitude, recommends the Baron to the Banshee Queen herself. It's at the behest of Sylvanas Windrunner that the rogue makes his way into the Western Plaguelands to infiltrate the halls of Scholomance. Here, the rogue delights in giving the apprentice necromancers first-hand experience in their chosen field of study, and takes particular satisfaction in the death of Darkmaster Gandling, closing the doors of the academy once and for all. Meanwhile, the Night Elves narrative is tied together more loosely. Centrally, the Kaldori are trying to protect nature and the land itself, but from every angle they're reminded of their once great empire, now fallen to ruin. Their story also never settles on a single source of corruption, instead swinging back and forth between the Legion, the Old Gods, and the Emerald Nightmare, which, at the time, we did not know were the same thing. Theta Saberfang, our Night Elf priest, begins her journey praying for guidance when Tyrande Whisperwind, High Priestess of Elune, sends her on a pilgrimage to reaffirm her purpose. Theta is sent into Blackfathom Deeps, once a temple to their goddess, now a den of dark rituals performed by the Twilight Hammer cultists in service to the old gods. Theta personally puts an end to the subject of their worship, Akumai the Devourer, before performing a ritual to purge the temple's corruption, with limited success. Tales of the Priestess eventually reach the new Archdruid, Fandral Staghelm, who summons Theta to the summit of Talon Peak. Some of you might remember this location from Warcraft 3, where Thrall and Cairn attempted to consult the Oracle, which then turned out to be Medivh, wearing a false mustache and googly eyes. While portrayed as an ancient, sprawling complex and a significant plot point in the story of Warcraft 3, in WoW this ruin is completely absent, with only a small Night Elf encampment remaining where it ought to be positioned. Based on some evidence from older notes, we decided to bring it back here. The story explores the creation of the Harpies, and their ties to the mysterious living statue, Princess Azun. Keeping with the theme of Stone Talon Mountains, we're exposed to the avarice of the Venture Company. The goblins, not merely content with their excessive logging and strip mining operations, have also breached the walls of the Holy Peak and are attempting to pillage the treasure of Princess Azun. Here, we finally get to lean back into the primal, bestial nature of the Night Elves. Staghelm has decided that the operation of the goblins are to be put to an end, permanently, and so Theta and the Archdruid slay the Harpies and drive the goblins from Talon Peak, after an extended battle with their leader, Mogul Razdunk, in his pimped-out goblin shredder.
About a half dozen expansions too early.
In the end, balance is restored. But with the Talon cleansed, the Archdruid's mind once again turns to the Claw. Some of you might be familiar with the rumors of the cut Timbermaw Hold dungeon, centered around the Furbolgs. The Furbolgs, despite their significance to the Night Elves, are relegated post-classic to the likes of Murlocs, Gnolls, and Kobolds, which, personally, I find unacceptable. Coincidentally, in Winterspring, there is a gated instance portal, rumored to lead to a never-finished Hyjal raid, that sits perfectly positioned for our purposes here. Thinking back to the Night Elf campaign in Warcraft 3, I was reminded that the Barrow Deeps, the massive underground cavern in which the druids of the Claw slept, contained not only the bear druids, but a group of corrupted furbolgs and the prison of Illidan Stormrage.
Ooh, fancy.
In Timbermaw Hold, Theta meets Jared Shadowsong, former general of the Kaldora Resistance, who has emerged from his long seclusion to aid the Night Elves' old Ursine comrades in combating the madness spreading through their race. The two journey together to Winterspring, whose conveniently placed instance portal will now lead to the Amber Horn Barrows, a new Furbolg dungeon that pits Theta Saberfang against the fell and nightmare-corrupted Furbolgs. At the root of the dungeon is the ancient satyr Perotharn, first among the Highborn to follow Xavius into his warped mutation, who has taken up residence in the prison of the Betrayer. Theta and Jared slay the monster, who, with his last breath, taunts the Night Elves with the knowledge that neither of the Stormrage brothers will be able to save them now, a thought which lingers in the mind of our priestess long after the satyr's eyes have closed for the last time, which I do believe catches us up. Zooming out for a moment, we've now accounted for the actions of both the undead and the Night Elves all the way up to the point where the Knights of the Lost Ashes and the Thunderlord Militia are founded within the cities of Stormwind and Orgrimmar. Some of you might be expecting us to make this the moment that the two races finally join with their new allies, but we're actually going to hold them apart for just a little while longer. The Night Elves and the Forsaken do also get a fourth dungeon, but in a different flavor than the Horde and the Alliance, where the Stockades and Ragefire Chasm occupy the role of short-term team building exercise and serve as a perfect launchpad for our new legendary quest lines. The last chapters for the foil races will be stylized instead as mega dungeons, or enormous complex structures featuring multi-tiered threats. Theta Saberfang, following the many different trails of corruption at the direction of her high priestess, accompanies Chandris Feathermoon, general of the Sentinel Army, to the ruins of the elven city of Eldrithalas, now known as Diremall. Meanwhile, the Banshee Queen has decided that the Forsaken have suffered the presence of the Scarlet Crusade long enough in her lands, and sends the Baron, alongside her champion, Nathanos Blightcaller, to lead a force against their stronghold, Scarlet Monastery. As the Ash Knights follow the Syndicate's trail of cloak and dagger espionage, and the Thunderslayers engage in gangland warfare with the Cabal, Theta and the Baron are pulled ever deeper into the prolonged battles for the Maul and the Monastery. This choice was made primarily to keep the Elves and the Undead preoccupied, and out of the hair of the Horde and the Alliance while they're off hunting dragons. In the next video, you'll understand why that's important. It has to do with the, shall we say, caustic relationship that these two races have with the opposing factions in vanilla, but...
Whoa. Don't pop all the cooldowns before the match starts.
Right. And on that note, I think here's a good place for us to call it a day. Frankly, this video has already gone on far longer than I ever intended any of our videos to go, but the sheer breadth and scope of vanilla wouldn't allow for anything less. I don't anticipate any future videos being as long as this one, which I think is a safe bet, but also sounds suspiciously like famous last words. After all, never again will a single patch introduce 40 zones and 20,
well, 30 now,
dungeons in one enormous, unreducible pop. Once more, referring back to the WoW Diary, it was the ambition of the dev team, looking at games like EverQuest, to create the first MMO where the players could feel overwhelmed by having too much to do. And having now tried and failed to squeeze their ambition into a 30-minute internet puff piece, I feel on a deeply spiritually exhausted level that they succeeded. I think for the safety of myself and others, I probably shouldn't be allowed back into the cut content archive for a while. But the hell with it. I regret nothing.
Nope, none of that. All right, give me your copy of the WoW Diary. Give it. No, give it!
Yeah, fair enough. We'll pick up from here next time, following the trail of our two foil characters through their mega dungeons before moving on to the next phase of the story, the Battlegrounds. Oh, and some of you may have clocked that a few dungeons present in Classic are still missing. Rest easy, you'll see them all before we're done here. Though we may be at the end of our Vanilla Dungeons video, that doesn't mean that we're finished using dungeons to enhance the narrative. I wanted to try to cover as many of them as possible before we move to the next phase of the story, but there will be dungeons in just about every phase of this series, and there's no way around it. Dungeons really are to WoW what boss battles are to the Soul series. They're what waifus are to the Persona series, or what obnoxious, soulless cash grabs are to Fortnite. They're the reason we're here, and they're the reason we keep coming back. But until then, I need a nap, and a bathtub filled with either scotch or cheese puffs. Maybe both. We hope we'll see you again soon. Hargan, do you want to sign us off?
Hargan smash.
Take care.